Hey guys, we're going to start taking a look at World War II in this unit, and we're going to start by looking at what was going on in Europe to make all this craziness kind of kick into gear. Now, hopefully you were able to get the worksheets and the cutouts that I sent to you. You should have had a map. Now, this is the only half we're going to need to work on today, the Europe half. This one was colored in by my son. And then you should have also had a couple of sections of cutouts. You could have either had this one that was already kind of pre-printed and pre-colored for you, or you could have had this one, which is a little bit more cartoony and you colored in yourself. Whichever one you want, doesn't really matter. Today we're going to focus on these three dudes right here. We're going to focus on Francisco Franco, Adolf Hitler, and Benito Mussolini. As far as Joseph Stalin and Hideki Tojo go, we'll worry about them at another time, okay? If things start going too fast for you, all you have to do, hit the pause button. I won't be doing much. I'll just be sitting here looking like this. Then when you're ready again, all you've got to do, is hit play. Okay? All right. So we're going to go and we're going to get started looking at the rise of dictators in Europe, part 1. Well, it's actually just part 1 is in Europe. Okay? That, of course, the most famous of all the dictators. Everybody should know who that gentleman is right there. And I guess I use the term gentleman loosely, but that is, of course, Adolf Hitler. But we're actually going to start with a different gentleman. Even though he was the last of the three to come to power, we're actually going to start with the least well-known of the European dictators, Francisco Franco of Spain. Franco said, "We do not believe in government through the voting booth. Spain has no such foolish dreams." So what is he talking about? And where did Franco come from? Well, following a failed coup plot against the Spanish government, Franco became the leader of a section of the Spanish Nationalist Army, which then participated in the Spanish Civil War in 1936. Now, this was a long-fought, bloody civil war, lasted about 3 years, and things weren't necessarily decided until the Nationalist Army started getting some outside help, and they received some support from such notable leaders as Benito Mussolini and Adolf Hitler. So after getting that support, the Nationalist Army ends up winning the Spanish Civil War, with Franco then taking over as the country's leader in 1939. Now, all of this is despite the fact that he was receiving opposition from another dictator by the name of Joseph Stalin, who we will cover in the next video. Now, Spain, during World War II, maintained an official stance of neutrality, but we're going to have to try and figure out what neutrality means to Spain, because it doesn't mean the same thing to Spain as it means to Switzerland. So in your note box on your map there, you can put Spain and General Francisco Franco, who was known as El Caudillo. He was a member of the Falange or Fascist Party of Spain, and he took power in a coup and civil war with German and Italian help. And again, they claimed to remain neutral in World War II, although again, we're going to talk about just what neutral looks like. There is Francisco Franco. He gets glued into slot number 1. So what does neutral look like if you're Spain? I mean, it's all good if you want to call yourself neutral, but what does neutrality actually look like? Well, for Spain, it looks a lot like, hey, I'd really like to be in the Axis if I could. In 1940, Franco meets with Hitler and discusses Spain joining the Axis. Now, it doesn't happen, as you know. The Axis is Germany, Italy, and Japan, but Spain wanted in there originally in 1940. In 1941, Franco then allows volunteer Spanish forces to fight on Germany's side against the Soviet Union. Now, it's important that you understand this is against the Soviet Union only, not against England, not against France, and when we get involved, not against the United States. The reason? Well, he was mad at the Soviet Union for fighting against him in the Spanish Civil War, and he did a lot of trading with Western European countries like Great Britain, like France, and he did not want Spain to suffer for it, okay? But more than 45,000 Spaniards ended up serving on the Eastern Front, fighting for Germany against the Soviet Union. Nazi ships were also used in Spanish ports, and Spain provided war materiel to Germany to fight in World War II. Ironically, neutrality also went the other way, because more than 60,000 Spaniards ended up joining the French Foreign Legion and the Free French Forces and ended up fighting for the Allies. What did Hitler think of Franco? That's a direct quote from Mr. Hitler down there on the bottom. It says, quote, "I'd prefer to have 3 or 4 of my own teeth pulled out than to speak to that man again, end quote, talking about Francisco Franco. Franco, by the way, ruled Spain until 1975, and through the decades he was viewed as becoming more and more lenient and more tolerable by most Western nations. However, he did remain a dictator. Moving on to Benito Mussolini, who said, "Let us have a dagger between our teeth, a bomb in our hands, and an infinite scorn in our hearts." What a sweetheart. Now, like Hitler, Mussolini fought in World War I. Also, like Hitler, he was wounded, and a mortar exploded in the trench where he was fighting, and he was left with more than 40 metal fragments in his body. Mussolini was known to be an extremely racist person, claiming that Africans and Asians threatened the power of the white race. And so he created the National Fascist Party in Italy in 1921, and then took power of the government in 1922, following what is known as the March of Rome. But what is a fascist? What is fascism? Fascism, as you can see here, is a political philosophy, movement, or regime, such as that of the Fascisti of World War II Italy, that places the nation, and often race, above the individual, and that stands for a centralized, autocratic, or one leader, government, headed by a dictator with severe economic and social regimentation and forcible suppression of opposition, simply meaning there are no opposing political parties, there's no opposing political point of view. You either believe what Mussolini believes, or you don't. And if you don't, you probably shouldn't say anything. In 1934, Mussolini, believe it or not, actually threatened war against Germany if Germany decided to invade Austria. So when we take a look at this picture here, we can see Mussolini and Hitler standing side by side with a big old grin on their faces. But most people do not understand that Il Duce, which was Mussolini's nickname, and Der Führer, which is what Hitler called himself, most people believe they were actually really good friends. That was actually not the case. Mussolini, like I said, threatened war against Germany in 1934, but when Austria declared themselves a German state in 1936, Mussolini decided he didn't have a problem with it. Later that year, 1936, Mussolini and Hitler did sign the Rome-Berlin Axis Pact, making the two countries allies in war. And later it was pretty much a known fact that Hitler viewed Mussolini as being something of a buffoon and a liability, never really feeling that the Italians were going to actually support him as much as he probably had hoped. So in your notes section, there again, we have Italy. Benito Mussolini, also known as Il Duce, was the leader of the Fascist Party, and he promised to revive the economy and restore the glory of the Roman Empire. Some of his major contributions were invading Ethiopia and Albania. So on your map, Italy is, of course, the boot country down there at the bottom. There is Benito Mussolini, and you put him in at number 2. That brings us to this little factoid about Mussolini. Believe it or not, he was expelled from school twice as a child, but later on he became a teacher before he rose to power. No worries. No such plans on this guy's part. Finally, and most importantly, as far as World War II goes, as far as rising dictators goes, this man, Adolf Hitler, who said, quote, "Make the lie big, make it simple, keep saying it, and eventually they will believe it," end quote. He was angry that Germany had, in his mind, been so unfairly treated by the Treaty of Versailles, and he was equally angry that Germany had allowed this mistreatment to happen in the first place. So shortly after World War I ended, Hitler began speaking out against the German government. In 1919, he joined the Nazi Party. Now, he did not create it, but he joined it. And the Nazi Party was an anti-communist and anti-German government party, which was then called the Weimar Republic. That was the German government. Now, a Nazi is a form of fascism that focuses more strongly on divisions of race and the theory of social Darwinism, which identified Germans as being part of a superior race of humans known as Aryans. The Nazi Party believed in anti-Semitism, anti-communism, scientific racism, and eugenics, which is the controlled reproduction of people to achieve desired genetic traits, all as a way to purify the German race to achieve racial superiority. Now, a lot of people don't know, but Hitler tried to first overthrow the government in 1923 in a failed coup attempt known as the Beer Hall Putsch. Okay, now during this Beer Hall Putsch, 16 of Hitler's group were killed, along with 4 police officers, and Hitler himself was arrested and charged with high treason. He was sentenced to 5 years in jail, but he only ended up spending slightly more than a year in jail, during which time he famously wrote his book Mein Kampf, or My Struggle. Now, originally, the book was called, quote, 4.5 years of struggle against lies, stupidity, and cowardice, end quote. And he basically laid out his beliefs and plans for Germany, including his belief in a one-race state. Also, with the title, it's pretty obvious that he was rather anti-German government. In the book, he considers the Jews to be germs that were poisoning society, and while he did not state how he would do it, Hitler did talk about the extermination of the Jews in Mein Kampf. In 1932, Hitler runs for president of Germany and actually gains 37% of the vote, taking in almost 13 million votes, but he loses. It's the only time he's going to run for public office because he's not going to have to run after that. Because the Nazi Party has become so big and so powerful, the Weimar Republic, led by President Hindenburg, is going to give Hitler the position of Chancellor of Germany. And then following the Reichstag fire, Hitler is given temporary power to act on Germany's behalf without Parliament's consent. That's huge because this is all Hitler needs to grab power up. He ends up outlawing all other political parties. He strips the power of the German states. And then when President Hindenburg dies in 1934, there's nothing left to stop Hitler as he seizes full dictatorial control of the government. So on your map, your notes section, you've got Germany and Adolf Hitler, or Der Führer. He is the leader of the Nazi Party. He blames the fire in the Reichstag on communists, which really riles the people up to become even more anti-communist, because the communists were the competing political party against the Nazis at the time. He uses Jews as scapegoats, as published in his book Mein Kampf, and famously he ends up taking the Rhineland, the Sudetenland, and Czechoslovakia, as well as ends up taking France, Norway, Poland, and makes a massive push into the Soviet Union before things fall apart for the Third Reich of the German country. There is Germany, there is Hitler, and there is the end of the rise of the dictators, at least as far as Part 1 Europe goes. We're going to be taking a look at the rise of the Asian dictators coming up in the next video segment. So, when all's said and done, you should have a map that looks just like this on the left-hand side with Franco, Hitler, and Mussolini all in place. In our next video, we're going to look at Stalin and Hideki Tojo. We'll talk to you later.